Hi, everyone. Welcome to our September Book Club Favorites event. This month, we're discussing The Invisible Hour from New York Times bestselling author Alice Hoffman. Today, we are joined by the author herself. We are also joined by some of our wonderful team members, Holly Clater and Sabrina Brawley, to lead the conversation. Before we get into our discussion, I just want to let everyone watching know 3 lucky viewers could win a signed hardcover copy of The Invisible Hour and a designed t-shirt. To enter for your chance to win, just leave a comment for us in the comment section of this video, and we'll do our best to answer as many live today on screen. And now, on to book club. Alice, thank you so much for joining us. Can you kick us off by telling us a little bit about The Invisible Hour?
Thank you so much for having me today. Yeah, The Invisible Hour is a story about a young woman named Ivy who gets pregnant, and she really doesn't know what to do about it. Her parents want her to do one thing. She doesn't feel like she has control over her own body. So she runs away and she joins a cult. And the story is really about her daughter, who is raised in this cult where books are banned. You're not allowed to go to the library, and women are treated pretty similarly to the way they're treated in the Scarlet Letter. And so it's a lot about libraries, and it's also about the Scarlet Letter and Nathaniel Hawthorne, which is her favorite book.
Awesome. This was such a beautiful book, and I'm so happy to be here talking to you about it. And what I love about all of your novels is the rich history that you incorporate. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit. We've got the cults, we've got the history of Boston, we've got the Scarlet Letter. So besides maybe rereading the Scarlet Letter, what were some of your processes in researching for this book?
Yeah, I live in New England, so we're kind of surrounded by this history of all these great writers. And when I read the Scarlet Letter, the first time I read it, I really didn't like it. The second time I read it, I related to it very strongly because it's about a woman who's an outcast. And my mother was that kind of woman. She was divorced at a time when I didn't meet anyone else who was divorced or had divorced parents until I went to college. So things were really different then. And one of the things I think was kind of visiting the places where Nathaniel Hawthorne had been. One place is called the Old Manse, and he moved there after he was married. That's in Concord. It's beautiful. And the other place is the House of the Seven Gables, which is if you're in Salem for Halloween, also try to see the House of the Seven Gables, which is an incredible place. And I just kind of felt the difference between now and then, and also the sameness between now and then, especially for women.
That library really acts as a sanctuary for Mia, and I think a lot of readers can definitely relate to that. Were you a frequent library visitor when you were growing up?
I was a library freak. I was there all the time, and when I asked, because I don't have a very good memory, and I asked the girls I grew up with, what do you remember about me? And almost all of them said, I just remember you walking home from the library reading while you were walking home. And the library was in like the next town, and they gave me a library card anyway. And it was kind of my secret life and my way of knowing about the world that I don't think I would have known if I hadn't been a reader. It changed everything for me.
That is amazing. I think a lot of people can probably relate to that as well. Yeah. Were there any particular librarians that impacted you as you were visiting the library?
Yes, the ones at the Malvern Library, whose names I never knew, and they had no idea what they meant to me. And also my school librarian, whose name was Mrs. Inkin, which seemed like such a perfect name for a librarian. And I mean, I did want to be a librarian, but then I thought, no, I'd rather be a writer.
Well, that's so lovely. And I love how the library was incorporated into Mia's life throughout the book. And another big aspect of the book that I loved was all the different sort of mother figure relationships, whether it was Ivy, Mia's actual mother, or all the other motherly figures in her life. And I feel like that's a really relevant topic in a lot of your books as well. So I'd love to just hear a bit about why you're so drawn to that topic in your writing.
That's such a good question because, I didn't even really realize that the book is about mothers and daughters until I finished the book. And then I realized, I had a very rocky relationship with my mother, but I also called her 3 times a day. So it was, it's a very complex relationship. But what you just said was interesting because I had a lot of surrogate mothers growing up. The wife of my writing professor I always felt like she was a mother to me. My agent, who was my agent for 40 years, I talked to her every day, every morning. And I felt like I needed other kinds of mothering from other people. And I feel like I do that now as well, that I have relationships where I'm a secondary mother. And I think it's a really important relationship because you don't have all of the tension and the old history. You just have somebody who just cares about you in the here and now. And that's very much true of Mia. When she meets this librarian couple, they are her surrogate mothers, and they're very different than her own mother, and they're able to help her heal.
That is very inspiring. Back to the Scarlet Letter and how it inspired you when you were writing it and doing the research. It's definitely incredibly relevant today. Obviously, the themes throughout. Is there something specific within that story that drew you to it and inspired you to write about it?
Well, I think, one thing is the idea that Nathaniel Hawthorne, who has been quoted saying some strange things about women, but he grew up in a household of strong women. His mother was always locked away in her room, but he had two sisters, one of whom was really brilliant, probably as brilliant or more brilliant than he, but she had no opportunity to do anything because she was a woman. And then he married into the Peabody family, the women were very ambitious and very interesting. And luckily for me, I'm friendly with Megan Marshall, who wrote the biography of the Peabody sisters. So anytime I had a question, I would call her and we would have these long discussions about, what it was like for a woman in 1850 or before that. And, kind of throughout Hawthorne's life. I think the other thing about Hawthorne is that he carried this burden of guilt because he had a family member who'd been a judge in the Salem witchcraft trials, a terrible guy who actually is in my other books, who was the reason that in my practical magic books there is a curse because of this relative of Nathaniel Hawthorne. So I think that the Scarlet Letter is kind of an apology for how horrible his ancestor was to women.
That is really fascinating. I did not even get that connection. So that is so I want to learn more about Nathaniel Hawthorne now.
Yeah, this book definitely brought on a lot of new different branches that I want to research too. I did just want to remind our audience members that 3 lucky winners could win a signed copy of The Invisible Hour and a design t-shirt by just dropping a question into the comment section of the video, and we'll do our best to answer the questions as they come on screen. And along the same vein as the strong female characters that you have in your book, they were all just so inspiring. And I wanted to ask, as you were writing the book, if you sort of identified with any of your characters or you had a favorite as the story went on.
It's funny because I always feel like I'm all of them, but I think Nathaniel's sister Elizabeth was really interesting to me because she was so brilliant and so she has this fantasy where she'll just run away and she'll just get on a boat and go to some other country and have a different life, have kind of a man's life and not be stuck, at home in the kitchen, unable to do anything or make her own choices. So I think I really identified with her.
I love that. I think that's a great strong woman to identify with. She was a favorite character too.
Yeah, I agree. Is she any chance she's going to show up in a future novel? I'd like to hear more about her.
So, but as I was writing it, I thought, she's definitely worthy of someone's novel because she's so interesting. Or maybe Megan will write a book about her, a nonfiction book about her. I don't know. I just think, she just at one point, Nathaniel Hawthorne produced this magazine, but he really did it with her, and she did at least half of it, but she couldn't have our name on it because that wasn't allowed. So it's just kind of it's a very sad time for women. And it brought up a lot of issues that are happening right now, that it's kind of a constant fight for women.
We do have a question from the audience if you want me to chime in with this, and then we'll go back to some of our other ones.
Sure.
But Diane actually has a 2-part question. She commented on YouTube. She first asked if that was your original cover and title. Maybe you can touch on a bit about the process of finalizing that. Yeah,
I'm really into covers because I am so drawn to books because of their covers. And I feel like my books have a certain feeling. And I saw this photograph and it felt like kind of the mysterious feeling of the book. That wasn't the original title. I find with books, I either have the original title before I have the book, or it takes forever to get to the title. And so this wasn't the original title. Actually, Stephen King, who was very nice and gave me a beautiful quote, said he liked the other title better. So I'm not going to say what it is. But for me, The Invisible Hour works because it's kind of that time between times. And it's also, I felt like it was the time, kind of a time that describes reading, where the time just kind of disappears into another world.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. And the cover was just so gorgeous. It really, as I'm reading and like just looking at the cover, I was really in my autumnal fall vibes. And then the second part of Diane's question is actually very relevant to just the news today. She asks that in some ways does the book's theme reflect the political movement of today? She says that she lives in Florida, which has banned books and the Supreme Court's Roe versus Wade decision. So yeah, we are in the middle of Banned Books Month. So if you wanted to just touch on that too.
I think it absolutely changed what the book was about. I mean, for one thing, the overturn of Roe versus Wade happened while I was writing the book, and I went back and rewrote it. And I wrote a letter that's in the ARC, the pre-book, about what it was like growing up. My mother was a social worker, and she worked with foster care and with protective services and with unwed mothers. And when I was 12 and 13, I used to go with her to pick up the babies, and it was and there were just so many girls and women who couldn't make their own decisions. And also, I don't know if I wrote about it in this, but abortion was illegal, and birth control was really unknown among the girls that I grew up with. It was, nobody knew anything about that, and how incredibly traumatic it was to so many girls that I went to high school with just disappeared, and they would get pregnant and you would never see them again. And I don't think younger women really understand what it was like in those days when you couldn't get an abortion. You had to get an illegal abortion. Super dangerous and extremely traumatic and terrifying. And also the whole idea of banned books and because reading is so important to me just personally. And I always feel that, the people who want to ban books and not have children read whatever they want to are people who are afraid that they'll think outside of this one particular way that they're supposed to think, because reading opens you up to be compassionate to other ways of thinking and other people and other lives. It's kind of how we know the difference between good and evil. And so I felt very affected by both of those things which were going on during the writing of the book, and the book changed because of them.
Thank you. Yeah, that letter that you had in the beginning of the arc was so powerful. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you.
We have another question on Facebook. Donna asks, why did you choose time travel to help create your story? And do you believe magic is a part of everything?
I don't even know if I chose it, but I just felt like, it was kind of like a fantasy about what it would be like to go back in time and meet all these people that I had loved and as a reader. And so it just kind of naturally evolved. And also I'm a fan of time travel books as a reader. So that just kind of evolved. I would say that I didn't believe in magic, except I seem to as a writer. And I think maybe it's my way of kind of approaching the world and the natural world, especially in kind of a spiritual way, in almost a religious way. It's kind of a substitute for me for religion.
Wow, that's really nice. We have another question from Dana. She commented on YouTube. She has a question about your writing process, which would be great to hear about. She asks how long it took you to write the book, and is there a time of day that you enjoy writing more than others? Do you sort of plot your books out, or are you just sitting down and seeing where the novel takes you?
Well, I used to not plot them out. I do plot them out now, but I don't necessarily stick with that plot, and things change. But I find it kind of gives me a place to begin if I plot it out, so that I'm not kind of just stranded there. I like to write in the morning. And when I was starting out and I had another job or I had little kids, I always got up at 4:45 and wrote then.
Wow.
Now I feel like life seems more complicated, and I just try to write whenever I can. And for me, I like to try to do it every day if I can.
We have another Facebook question. Shenna is asking, how do you pick the names of your characters? Do you like to pick names from people in your personal life?
Ooh.
That's interesting. No, I don't want to. I don't want to particularly pick people from my personal life unless they're villains, which there's some sort of joy in that. But I have lists of names, and it just seems like the characters kind of name themselves. It's almost as if they walk in the door, and they have a history, and they have a name, and I don't have to think too much about it.
That's beautiful. And I felt like Ivy's name really like lended itself well to the vibes of the novel. They were all really beautiful.
Thank you.
We've got one from Daphne. She says, you mentioned that you talk to your agent every morning. How much does an agent guide you in the process of your writing, or is that really your editor's job?
Well, my agent Elaine Markson passed away a while ago. So I have another agent who's wonderful, but we don't talk every day. That was like we talked every day for 30 years. I think it's both, really. I think that's true for most people because your agent is the first person to see it and the first person you start to talk about the book to. But your editor is the one that you're working with really closely. So for me, it's really both. They're both really important to the process.
Yeah, that's great.
This one is from Rose, and I want to know the answer to this as well. Jodi Picoult said you are one of her favorite authors. Can you name a few of your favorite authors?
Ooh, very nice.
Well, my favorite author, and I think the greatest American author, is Toni Morrison. And I just don't think there's anyone like her at all. I was lucky enough to know her a little bit when I was young. After my first book was published, she was incredibly kind and generous. And I was also lucky enough to see 3 of her 5 last lectures at Harvard. And I feel she's just a genius. And the interesting thing about her is, you can tell it's one of her books. And I always think, and this is the way I was taught in writing, is that the most important thing is the writer's voice. It's great if you have a great plot and blah, 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 but it's really your voice, and that a writer's voice is like a fingerprint. Only you can have it. Nobody else can do it, can copy it. It's yours. So my favorite writer to read that I think is also a genius is Elizabeth Strout. So as soon as she has a book come out, I make sure to get it right away.
Awesome.
Very nice answers. Love that. Jennifer in our audience has a question, and this is fun. Has a character ever surprised you? So maybe as you're writing, maybe they changed the course of who you thought they were going to be?
Oh, completely. That happens to me all the time. It happened especially in a book I wrote a long, long time ago called Seventh Heaven, where my character suddenly got involved with somebody that I had no idea she was going to get involved with, and that totally surprised me. But that kind of thing happens all the time for me.
That's so fun.
All right. Rose has a follow-up question. She heard another author speak recently and said she knows her characters so well that she could tell you their favorite color. So in that vein, even though it's never mentioned, do you feel the same about your characters, that you know intimate details about them that aren't even revealed to the reader? Are they like real people to you?
Well, I feel like they're real people in that I feel like I am them. And so when I'm writing about so much that I see them, it's like I'm inside of them. And I don't, I used to make a lot of lists about things like their favorite color and things like that. I don't feel like I need to know that anymore. I just need to know kind of who they are emotionally and psychologically, and everything else just kind of naturally follows.
Awesome. That is beautiful.
Nice. And going back to some of your favorite authors, maybe we know what the answer to this one is, but if you could, have this sort of time travel ability, who is an author that you would go back and speak to?
Oh,
what you want to learn from them too?
I would go to see the Bronte sisters.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's always so amazing to me that they had such a small personal life and such a huge literary life and a huge emotional life. So I think I'd want to have dinner with them.
That would be a great time.
But do I want to have it in their time or this time?
Oh yeah. Maybe bring them back. Bring them back to our period.
That's an important point. Randy would like to know if you're working on anything now.
I'm always working on things, but I'm afraid to talk about things that I'm working on because sometimes you write a whole book and it's not the book, or you write half a book and it's not the book. So I tend to not talk about it too much until it's really done.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, you are always churning out really great books, so I'm sure whatever's coming is going to be great too.
Thank you.
And I don't know, some writers don't like to read as they write. I'd love to hear what you've got on your TBR or, what you're reading right now.
I don't read fiction while I'm writing fiction, and that feels like a loss to me, and I miss reading more fiction. I tend to be reading historical narratives about the time. If I'm writing a historical novel, which I am now, I'm reading really, nonfiction and history.
Well, that makes sense. A lot of research.
Yeah, I don't think anyone else would be interested in what I'm reading at the moment.
Amanda on Facebook would like to know, how do you pick the best point of view to write, and how do you publish a final book?
I think, the point of view sort of comes along with the story. A couple of times in fact, several times I've written stories and I wish I'd written them as a novel, but they just didn't come that way. They came as a story. And even though after I write them, I could see them being a novel and I wish they'd been a novel, it's just not the way that they came to me.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially the way you rewrote The Invisible Hour based on current events.
Yeah.
Yeah. I loved your answer about your favorite librarian being one of your school librarians. We have a question from Jennifer who asks, she says that she's a elementary school teacher and would like to know if there was any teachers that inspired you.
I had a lot of teachers. I had a great writing teacher named Albert Garrard who really inspired me. But really in elementary school, it was the librarian. It was Mrs. Incan. Yeah. I used to run away from class and hang out in the library, and she allowed me to do that. So, that she was really the person that affected me most in elementary school.
That's such a sweet story.
Regarding, you said you try to write every day, and I have a fondness for pen on paper myself, but Rose on Facebook would like to know, do you write using a computer or paper?
I'm writing on a computer or word processor or whatever you call it. I have a really old one that is constantly going to die because it's very small and they don't make these anymore. So I feel like I'm like one with my computer because I can take it everywhere with me.
Well, that's really great. Yeah, I mean, you got to adapt to the new ways. And I think that a lot of people have come to some of your other novels, especially Invisible Hour, from just being a fan of all your other series like Practical Magic. We have a question. Does it feel sort of surreal to have Practical Magic become such a major piece of people's lives? I know for me, I watch it every autumnal season. I read the series over. So, and it just gets me keep coming back to the novels that you write. So how does it feel having such an impactful series for people?
Oh, well, I feel incredibly lucky, but I think it's really interesting how it's become more popular, not less popular. And when it first came out, there weren't many movies like it in that, it was all about women, all about sisterhood. It was also about domestic violence. It was about the importance of relationship of mothers and daughters. And these were things that I think weren't so highly valued in Hollywood at the time that it came out. And every year it's more popular. And I love the fact that it's watched by mothers and daughters and sisters, and that it becomes kind of part of a tradition and a family, kind of tradition. So I feel lucky to have been involved with it. I'm thanking Sandra Bullock because she was the one that wanted to make the movie.
Oh, great. Yeah. And that it goes right back to that theme of mothers, daughters, and the relationships, and just shows how strong of that theme is throughout all of your literature. So
yeah. And that we don't see it that much.
It's great.
Yes, absolutely. Jennifer would like to know, how is the audiobook narrator selected? Do you have a role in choosing who gets to bring your books to life?
I do. I mean, I really do request certain people. And I requested for the Invisible Hour that they go to Jessie Mueller, who is such an amazing, I'm a huge fan of hers. And she does a lot of work on Broadway and was the first person in Waitress and was in the Carole King musical. And I think her reading is one of the most beautiful readings I've ever heard. She's amazing.
That's great. So if anyone watching has not read Invisible Hour yet, you might want to pick up the audiobook and listen to it there. And we have another question from Gina. This is good for any writers. What do you like to do when you feel blocked in your creative process?
I feel blocked a lot more than I used to. I used to not believe in it until it happened to me. That's when I start reading. And then I kind of remember how important books are and what they mean to me. Because I think when I get blocked, I have this feeling like, who cares? What does it matter? I'm not doing anything really important. Like I'm not a doctor. I'm not, And then when I read novels, I remember, how important they are and how they can kind of change the world for you.
That's such a great answer.
Do you have any fall rituals that you follow?
Well, I live in New England, so everything seems like a ritual. I personally avoid Salem. It's very crowded, even though it's a really fun, wonderful place to be. But I think, I don't have any specific fall rituals. I just love it.
I'm right there with you. I think Colleen is going to hop on in a second too.
Hi, guys. Sorry, that took me a second. I just want to thank you all for such an incredible discussion. And Alice, I have to say, I know this has already been said, but I love The Invisible Hour so much. Reading Nathaniel Hawthorne was a big piece of my childhood, and I felt like I got to relive all the great parts of that and really feel the power of it again. But also, I am just like Sabrina and Holly in the fact that I watch Practical Magic and reread it every single fall, and it's just a ritual that has to be a part of my life. So I feel very lucky that I was able to listen in on this chat today. Before we go, I just want to give one last reminder that you can still post a question in the comment section to be entered to win our Invisible Hour sweepstakes. Our next book club favorites read will be Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. You can join our Facebook group or follow us on Instagram for the latest updates. And make sure you're keeping up with Alice so you don't miss any of the upcoming fall fun. You can follow her on Instagram and Facebook or subscribe to her newsletter. Finally, Holly, Sabrina, and Alice, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.